Hi, welcome
Hello.
to Revive and Rise. My name is Melody Parrish, and I'd like to welcome you. I have a special guest with us, and it's Sheldon Smith. He is a former technology and customer service executive, and he's currently an entrepreneur, and he has a podcast, Experience Relativity. So thank you so much, Sheldon, for coming to be with us.
Thank you so much, Melody, for having me. I appreciate you inviting me to do this.
Yeah, and so this month is African American History Month. And so we want to raise African American voices about the racism and trauma they experience from the racism. So we'd like to hear your story about how you've experienced these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody has a story in reference to like experiences with racism as far as African Americans go. Um, for me, I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is a very traditional area. And I think that from my experiences growing up, uh, racism, I would say, was almost a part of the culture. So because of the, integration into our daily lives, a lot of it you don't even notice until you start learning about it. And then you realize that there are racist tendencies or things that are happening around you that you just didn't realize they were what they were at the time. So I would say that my introduction really to it came in school first more than anything. Like as soon as you start to receive some level of education around it, typically, during Black History Month is when it receives the most attention. But of course, whatever time it is of year, when you get to the lesson about the founding of the country and things of that nature, you can't talk about that without talking about, the fact that there were enslaved people that helped build this country. So you learn about that stuff. And then, you go through, of course, each year, Black History Month, where we pretty consistently talk about the same figures and the same narrative about Black history, and a lot of that, truthfully, if I'm giving my opinion on it, it's very tame.
Mhm.
It's a story that is painted, as they say, with like rose-colored lenses.
Yes.
Um, it's presented as a story of sort of the triumph of unity at some point in time, or that's kind of how it's presented, as if at some point we all unified and agreed to do the right thing, without pointing a finger or naming who the villain was in
Mhm.
that story. So I think that's kind of my introduction or experience to it is, first the lessons of the founding of the country, which, like I said, there's not a lot of depth in that. You just understand that, slavery was a thing about how the nation was founded. And then you have the Black History Month, each year, which again, you kind of go into the same things every single year, same figures every single year, same narrative every single year. And again, it kind of gets presented as if the story was like a triumphant story for all,
Mhm.
uh, versus, just telling it a little bit more objectively where, people did things, you know, bad things to, to a group of people, and not like letting that be. So I'm not sure. I don't know if I could say who's more responsible for the way that that story gets presented, because each party has an interest in the story being presented the way it is. Like, I don't think that African American people want to continuously be reminded of what occurred at that time. And we want a story to be, or we want the narrative to be more positive than negative. And I also think, those who are the descendants of non enslaved Americans, or non enslaved Americans during that period of time, I don't think they want to be painted as a villain either. So I think the story gets portrayed the way that it is portrayed. Um, and I think that has a little bit to do with both sides, but also I think we this is America per se. And I don't know that we or this country ever kind of accurately portrays things. And it's not, again, I'm an American. I'm here. I've been trained, brought up in the same ways, but I think uh, the story isn't ever as transparent as it can be, and that goes all the way back to the beginning. So that's what I would say about, my sort of introduction or experience to racism in general, and sort of the beginning of me being aware of racism and its presence in America or in general.
Yeah, yeah, I like that you bring that up. It's like we say, "Oh, it's African American History Month," and it's great to understand about the hero, but the way it's portrayed is like there was this bad thing, then there was this hero, and now there's nothing else. It's like it's ended,
Mhm.
and you know, it makes it's kind of like it's whitewashed. It makes the white people feel good. And I know as an African American, you don't want to be reminded of the horrible things that happened. That's traumatic as well. Um, so I do see your point. It's just brought up in a different way and it's taught every year. So I feel like it's kind of trying to brainwash our African American population too that oh, this is all better. But you guys know better that it's not. It's like it's continuing. So can you talk more about the continuation of things, what you've noticed and experienced?
Yeah, I would say, though the surface level is very much so presented as if that was that period of time and events happened that ended it, because we talk about the end of slavery
Yeah.
and the end of segregation and Jim Crow and, these things. For the most part, I would say those things did not necessarily end. They were just, you put, as the saying goes, you put lipstick on a pig.
Yes.
So it just got a little kinder, gentler, or buried behind layers of other things per se. Um, the continuation, and I have a very interesting take on these things, and I will say that from my experience, I was listening to something this morning, the Breakfast Club's radio show, and I believe the gentleman's name is Jason Williams. He runs a program that teaches kids self defense, but he uses it to teach them discipline and how to control their emotions. And he was speaking about parenting from a place of fear. That's what he was talking about. How to like operating off of fear and like the continuation of those things starts for me in the things that I have to be taught or told by my own African American community about how I should be in the world. So, the most common example of that is how you interact with a police officer. That is a common it's a common lesson or conversation that happens in African American communities especially those in like urban communities or like low income communities, where it just appears that there is a constant tension between law enforcement and the African American community. So your awareness of the continuation of that starts with the conversations that you begin to have at home as your parents are preparing you to be able to be outside of the house. Some people start those conversations much earlier, but the let's say the average is happening the minute your child starts to leave your presence as a parent. So when your kid starts to be able to go to and fro without you being there, you have to teach them what to do when you are not present. I've experienced that firsthand because I was at a high school football game, and this story has an interesting twist. I was at a high school football game, and there was a heightened awareness by the law enforcement at the game that there may have been like a planned altercation that was going to occur between two groups of people at this football game. So lots of police officers around, and they eventually stopped allowing people to move around the stadium. They made the group who was there for one team stay on one side, and the group that was there for the opposite team stay on the other side. So I, not really aware of this, learned a lot of that afterwards. I'm walking around and I'm no longer in high school. I think I graduated the year before, but I was attending a high school football game, which is very big in my community back home. So as I'm moving around the football stadium, I encounter a police officer who is telling me to sit down. And I asked him why, why can't I move around the stadium? Like, this is a football game. I paid to get in here and I really don't want to sit in the stands. Cold aluminum stands, and it's a, cold fall evening.
Yeah.
I would rather watch the game while moving around and staying warm. And I was with a group of my friends anyway. So, long story short, the police officer reiterates what he had to say to me, and then, gets kind of forceful in his comments. And I'm like, listen, I'm a grown man. You don't have to talk to me in this way. So he tells me, basically, he shuts down what I'm saying while I'm talking. And he tells me I need to sit down right now. And he pulls out a shock stick. Like the stick that the police officers use that is like a taser, but they touch you with it.
Oh God.
So I'm like, so you're gonna shock me in the middle of this stadium with all of these people around, and I have done nothing but ask you why you feel like you should be able to tell me that I need to sit down as a grown adult at a place that I have paid to be.
Mm.
So while this is all going on, I'll give you the plot twist. This was another African American police officer who was treating me this way. And he was surrounded by a group of white police officers. And
Mhm.
the minute he pulled that stick out of his like holster, they all backed up to remove themselves from the altercation. They
Oh.
were going to let him do what he did on his own. And I'm sure in their head they knew this situation escalated quickly.
Mm.
And this just doesn't seem like it's going to end well. So they attempted to remove themselves from the
Mm.
situation. The twist is the racism doesn't just occur with people who don't look like me, with people who are not African American people.
Yeah.
Some people kind of buy into this situation. And that's one of the big things that I think goes sort of unnoticed about racism. But there's a lot of people, if you look up the information on it, is that a lot of racism occurs because it's a part of culture, right? Whether it is law enforcement culture, whether
Mhm.
it is just purely the culture of America, right?
Yeah.
So those types of incidents, like someone is just buying into a culture. And I think that is probably the most dangerous part about racism in America
Yeah.
is that it's a part of the culture. So it doesn't even matter who is the person who is really, acting on the accepted culture, because it could be, an African American person, it could be a Caucasian person, it could be an Asian person, it could be any person. But because it's an accepted part of our culture, um, it kind of it is perpetuated. Excuse me, it continues to go on.
Mhm.
And it's funny. I'll give you a funny, not really, but just it's humorous to some degree. You have no choice but to laugh at it. But there was, I believe, a psychologist who basically proposed that extreme racism is a mental illness.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. He proposed that extreme racism was a mental illness. And what's probably more surprising than that is when it went to the National Institute of Health for a ruling on whether extreme racism should be classified as a mental illness, it ultimately was shot down. The reason why it was shot down is because they said extreme racism is a part of American culture. It is not an illness.
Oh
This
wow.
person is actually behaving normally in American society if they have extreme racist behaviors or tendencies.
Oh
So,
wow.
yeah, so this is the reason why
Mhm.
extreme racism is not considered a mental illness, is because it's considered a normal part of American culture.
Oh wow. That's just shocking. Uh and just horrible that it was even considered to be a mental illness, probably so that people could get off with it.
Hmm.
And when you're talking about the African American police officer and he was surrounded by the white officers, do you think that it may have been that he wanted to prove something, you know?
Hmm.
And I wonder if, like, Americans in society feel like they have to prove things to to be at a different level or kind of get out of the idea that maybe this is an African American, but I don't act this way, or that kind of thing. What are your thoughts about that?
100%. Like 100% in that situation, I believe that officer was establishing himself to some degree in the group that he was in. Um, Now, the bigger theme that you just brought up, also 100% agree. There are situations, and I can speak about this firsthand from being in corporate America, because in corporate America, there is a sense of, and it's well spoken about, but there is a sense that you must distance yourself from the traditional image, the quote unquote traditional. I will say quote unquote traditional because there is the image that is portrayed by media, news, TV, movies, all of these things. So that image of African American people, there is a need to distance yourself from that. And you have to be conscious of it. And there's even a term for what you're doing, which is called code switching. So code switching is, I can go home and be around predominantly African Americans, and my behavior will be a certain way. When I walk into that office, swipe my badge, my behavior is a certain way. And those two things can be very different for African Americans. Um, so when you go into corporate culture, yes, there is a point of proving that I am not that image. And it may, like I said, I will call it the traditional, like presented image of African Americans, because that's not even the real image that's actually occurring, but that is what you are trying to set yourself apart from, the stereotype or traditionally presented image of African Americans. So you go into work every day, and that may, contribute to this idea that you hear a lot when talk about the things that African Americans have to go through the course of their lives. It's said, you got to work 10 times harder to get the same thing. Well, that's a part of the work. A
Yeah.
part of that extra work that you have to do is to constantly dispel or distance yourself from the traditionally presented image or stereotypes of an African American. So you start to do that by way that you speak,
Mhm.
and you talk about trauma per
Mhm.
se. Like for me, I man, as long as I was in school, this was a common thing. You talk white. This
Uh,
as a child,
uh,
everybody in the neighborhood,
mhm.
used to say that about me. You talk like a white person. Like why you talk white all the time?
Mhm.
And that was a thing of being my mother was very big on education. My mom wanted me to be a doctor. So that's how far she was pushing my educational journey out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was all about education. It was all about good grades. And it was all about like having the opportunity that you want for yourself.
Mm.
So yeah, that the trauma of being in, a predominantly black community and because I spoke clearly, which again, and I'll be very clear, I don't think anything is wrong with the way that everybody around me spoke when I
Yeah.
was a kid. It's
Yeah.
nothing. But it's funny because if someone calls me from my neighborhood, I was at work,
Mhm.
I'll speak to them. And if I'm on the phone long enough, I kind of switch back into speaking the same way.
Yeah.
And then when I get off the phone, the people around me are like, that was who was that that you were talking to? And I'll be like, oh, it's my dad. And it's like, man, like you
Yeah.
sounded so country
Yeah. Oh,
when
yeah.
you were talking to your dad. And I'm like, yeah, it's just natural. When I speak to my father, I speak that way. When I speak to my grandparents, when I'm at home, I speak that way. When I go into the office, though, it I don't even it's subconscious at
Mm.
this point. It's subconscious. So those um those are the types of scenarios, and that's one of the simplest ones of yeah, you feel like you have to prove
Mhm.
something to someone. And it's specifically like it can be to people who are not African American, but I think it also plays the same way amongst our own community, setting ourselves apart from each other. Like just saying that you meet people who are at a certain level and living a certain lifestyle. Like I am trying to prove that I am not you.
Mhm.
I live a different life. I have, a Mercedes Benz and I have a big house in this neighborhood and I wear this type of clothing, that type of stuff. It's also setting yourself apart from your own the people that look just like you as well. But I do think corporate America was a place where it couldn't be more clear that it was important that you set yourself apart. If I can, I'll tell you another
Oh,
story.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So performance management. I don't know how much experience you have with the performance management process, but it's quite interesting when you sit in a room with a group of people who are evaluating the performance of everyone else. And some of the things that are said about people, specifically with their behavior. So it starts with results and then competency are the two main areas that they get into. So the results are the numbers, and most of those things cannot lie. The only kind of wiggle room you have there is who gets credit for what results. Sometimes credit is shifted, to people when someone is lobbying. Um, but when it comes to competency, that's the interesting part because it becomes very subjective. And just the same conversation we were having before about the the way that I spoke when I'm at home or on the phone with somebody from home or the way that I speak when I'm in the office. And that shows up as oral, written, or verbal communication. And people get scores on these things.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so just imagine if I did not code switch when I walked through the door and
Mhm.
I spoke in the same way that I spoke when I'm talking to the people at home as I do when I go into my corporate office. That may show up as, oh, well, this person doesn't have good oral written communication skills. And I have seen this particularly with people who immigrate. You
Mm.
know, they've got accents.
Yeah.
They have things like that where you know it gets counted against them. It literally gets counted against them that their English may be a second, third, fourth, or fifth language for some of these people, and then you have a space like technology where there is an overwhelming number of South Asians and that come with their own accent also, but no one minds that accent. Why? Because they value the skills that they bring to the table.
Right.
So everyone will deal with that
Mm.
because they are valuable enough or seen as valuable enough to tolerate or deal with that. But another group, like I said, I've seen it happen with many African Americans. Like I said, depending on where they're from, they could be from the deep South in Alabama and have that country twang, never, and,
Yeah.
and say things, write things, do all this in a particular way, and it gets counted against them. So there's lots of different ways that it shows up of having code switch or prove something to someone else. And particularly, it is, to non-African American people that you are trying to prove something to because of the traditional image that is being presented or the stereotypes that are there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I was talking to a friend. It's interesting to me that everything that is like a villain is always in black. It's always
Mhm,
it's always in black. It's like subliminal messages. The hero
mhm,
is always in white. The villain is always in black. When even back to the westerns when they had like the cowboy hats and the vests and everything, it was always like that. And then you see like the show Cops, and it's always the white policemen that are running after the African American criminal. You know, it it's just ingrained in there, and I think when you see that, it just makes that, like you say, that stereotype, which is so bad. I know,
mhm,
I just finished reading, Between the World and Me by Ted
mhm.
Coates. I've read
Okay.
it 3 times. It is just such an amazing book, filled with like raw emotions. He talks about different things and he talks exactly what you're talking about. It starts in school, and he said that he always felt like he had to give double
Mhm,
in everything. And he said, I don't remember, I think he said in high school when he realized that you know, there's this quote, number two pencils and word conjugations and Pythagorean theorems were going to be the difference between the world and me. And,
mhm,
it's just, but there's so many systems that are set up that oppress African Americans, be it employment, housing, education. So it's like you try to give double, but you end up having to give like 10, 20, 30%. And still, sometimes that's not enough, you know.
yeah.
So can you speak more about that idea, about education and housing and all those different things that are kind of working against?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say it the most interesting part of that, and I this is something that I say often. is the only power that exists is what you know that I don't know. And that's how a lot of those things played out. They systems are leveraged and then not informing others of how the system works is what kind of allows it to settle the way it does. So these institutions that are in place, essentially the rules are there and available for everyone. But if I don't know where to go and find those rules, I don't know how to operate within those systems. So the oppressive effect of those institutions comes from a lack of knowledge of how those institutions work. Because if we knew the same thing that others knew about those institutions, they would not oppress us. We
Right.
would be knowledgeable and we would leverage them the same way everyone else does. So it's the barrier that is placed on between our understanding, or as you talk about education, what is chosen to be taught to one group versus another is
Yeah.
where you start to create that divide. And that bolsters the systems that ultimately are just tools to facilitate that type of disadvantage, facilitate that type of oppressive behavior. Because again, if you publish the rules there and told everybody, hey, go look here to see how this rule operates or this institution operates, people are going to figure that out. And it doesn't matter what color you are. You're going to figure it out eventually.
Mhm.
So these things like the housing situation, education, like what you're being taught and what you're being taught about how to get a house. Like not knowing that home ownership is the number one way to build wealth for anyone. Like anyone. It doesn't matter who you are and what your ethnic background is. Home ownership is a cornerstone to building financial or to building generational wealth. But no one in particular communities is educating the people in those communities about how important that is. Like I know people who will spend their entire lives renting. And that's not a bad thing if it works for you, as long as you're building something for yourself some other way. But if you want to do it the same way everyone has done it for hundreds of years, you have to purchase something. Even if you don't live in it, you have to own some property
Yeah.
somewhere because it's going to help you eventually.
Mhm.
So, like that not being taught to groups of people, starting businesses. Very few people talked to me as I grew up about how important it was to start a business or to have a business. And what is the difference between having a business and being a W 2 employee? Because W 2 employees are taxed the most of
Right.
anyone. If you own a business, then a lot of your taxation can be reduced through you taking on the responsibility of owning a business. You're
Right.
providing a service. So
Mhm.
that is looked at favorably. And to be a W-2 employee is kind of looked at as being at the very bottom of the scale, a person who is going to give the smallest amount of effort and to live off of the work of all of the other people who decided to take on the accountability for a business and all these things. But again, who informs you of these things? Like, so yeah, if it's missing in education, it's missing in education. There are things that are in housing that were, the situation with redlining and like not underwriting mortgages in particular areas and those types of things, so that African American people ultimately had a very difficult time establishing home ownership. So when you pull that curtain back or that structure back, it's it's interesting because it was a logical business decision for the companies who said they weren't going to write mortgages in particular areas. It just so happened those areas were areas that were predominantly Black areas. If Black people knew that, if African Americans knew that, they would have done something differently to ensure that they were not negatively impacted by the decision. But because they didn't know, they ended up sitting ducks for something, or sitting in that position where they became the the weakest link in the chain per se, and then they got taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to education and knowing things. These structures are there, but what separating us from being able to operate on like the high side or the positive side of something is that we don't have anyone that knows what, you know, needs, what we need to know in order to move from the space of surviving, you know, to thriving, to
Mhm.
like just living your dream. So I think all of those things that are there, all of those structures that are there, whether they be like governmental structures or legal structures or financial structures, put them all in the same bucket, really. What makes us the one that gets the short end of the stick is because we don't have enough people that know how those things operate, and sharing that knowledge through the community, so that way the African American community understands that thing just as much as everybody else does it, or everybody else understands it. So that's why, the efforts for like diversity, equity, and inclusion became so important,
Right.
because they were just, if nothing else, even if we weren't benefiting as much as we should have benefited from those programs, which if you look at the statistics, I believe we African Americans were fifth or sixth in the chain in who benefited the most from DEI efforts. From everything, like I'm hearing that the statistics say that we were fifth or sixth in that chain. And
Mhm.
at the very top of that chain was white women.
Yeah.
Just because they were not white men, they they were like first in line on that whole deal. Um, so it's there to give us exposure so we can see
Mhm.
how it operates, and then ultimately share that with more of our community so that we can understand and more people can take advantage of it. But that is the difficulty in it, is that you put DEI in a structure. For example, you put DEI in the government. Okay, cool. How much do we inherently understand about how the government operates, how to take advantage of those programs?
Right.
Well, if we haven't been, in that space, then
Mhm.
you still put it behind a barrier. So DEI in corporate America. Okay, so you put it in corporate America. Well, how many of us are in positions to really take advantage of that program and then support others in that program? I can tell you, I've been in a room with 30 plus directors and been the only Black person in that room out of 30 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if anybody was going to advocate for someone that looked like me, the only person that was going to do it, really was me, unless someone else had enough awareness to be objective about something and know their bias and stop themselves and say, like, you know what? Because I'm biased.
Mhm.
All of us have our inherent biases. So if
Right.
you are not conscious of that, you will fall into your comfort zone and you will do exactly what you comfortably do. So the DEI efforts also kind of get put behind a barrier. So it's still difficult for us to make that connection without having enough people there.
Right. Yeah.
Now, the coolest statistic that came out of this, that I'm hearing lately, is the statistic that the most educated like demographic in America is
Mhm.
Black women.
Oh.
So yeah, like the most educated demographic in America currently is Black women. And I've been reading about that for years, that, the number of Black women attending colleges,
Mhm.
getting bachelor's, master's, and doctorate has been going up and up and up. Like it's really been skyrocketing pretty quickly. So funny thing about the current space, when we talk about a meritocracy and we talk about the opportunities and how, okay, that's better than having DEI programs, is that we should really focus on the meritocracy and the qualified candidates. Then how is it that, Black women are not near the top for all of these, high ranking positions? Because statistically, they are the most educated group,
Mhm.
currently in America. So there's always something, some barrier that's in between African Americans and being able to be successful. And as much as I'm not a fan of social media, really, for the way that it is used, so I'll take that back. Not that I'm not a fan of social media, I'm not a fan of the way that social media is used. That is one of the things that I do think has been really beneficial to the African American community, because so much information can be quickly circulated that way, but that is also a gift and a curse, because misinformation spreads, seems like, much faster than the right information that will help you make the right decisions and move along. Um, so I think, yeah, that has been helpful in kind of removing some of those barriers and making people aware of things. But I think all of those structures and institutions that are there, they're there,
Mhm.
and they're written in a way that they could fly. Like nobody's going to stop them.
Yeah.
But the difference between those who are able to take advantage of those programs and not end up getting the short end of the stick are those who are informed, those who are in the know about how those things work. And there is usually a barrier of, access or information to understanding how those things work, which then ultimately leaves, in a lot of cases, African Americans being the ones that got the short end of the stick because they just didn't know. They did not have access to the information. There weren't enough channels to circulate the right information for people to understand how to do well with these things. The rules were not clearly published.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I definitely agree. And the systems and the institutions uh, make it that way, and
Yeah.
that's where the oppression comes in, right? The systems make it that way, so the people stay oppressed. They can't get out of that hole they find themselves in, and it's like a vicious cycle
Mhm.
that I feel like is a generational cycle. It seems
Mhm.
like the parents or the grandparents, they kind of lose hope, and because they don't see people around them that are getting up out of the hole they're in. So it's like, well, we just can't do it. We just can't do that kind of mentality. And I think that's what the system wants, to keep that mentality so there's no chance of.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
know my friend, I had a friend that had an ethnic name, and she was a nurse, graduated, everything, sent in her application to the hospital. They denied it. Then
Mhm.
I'm gonna try this again. So she put a Caucasian name, same exact application, sent it in, and they called back for an interview. And that's just so infuriating that those kind of things happen,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just, I feel like it's just traumatic to people when they already know that. If
Yeah.
you already know those kind of things. So what could that possibly do to you in mentally, and how would you overcome that? I think is the question too. When you feel like you're not set up for success, there's already so much against you. Like how would you get over that or above that?
Yeah. Um, I'll tell you something that I have observed in my life, especially from the area that I'm from. Like I said, the 757 area, Chesapeake, Virginia. A lot of how that is overcame, or how they overcome that particular thing, is kind of to lose accountability and put faith somewhere else.
Mhm.
And it, faith is the appropriate word, because religion then becomes the thing. It's like I'm going to pray to God that God will help me overcome these things because I don't see a way of doing it myself. It seems like the cards are stacked against me, the odds are stacked against me. So I'm going to, put it in God's hands and hope God helps me to overcome these types of things. And that's one way that people have chosen to go about it
Mhm.
is that I'm not going to put it on me to overcome this thing. I'm going to put it on God to overcome this thing or to help me overcome this thing. That is one approach that people have to doing it. And it kind of, they, from what I have seen or experienced, it helps them kind of make with that thing. Like with the existence of these conditions or circumstances that we live in where it feels like the odds are so stacked against you, and kind of whatever you get out of it is by the grace of God. So that's one way that I see people, it's almost like they withdraw themselves from it and say that that's a battle that God will fight for me. I'm not going to fight that battle myself. I'm just going to keep doing my thing. Whatever it is that's in my control, because that's not within my control. Me personally, that did not work. that that didn't work for me because I kind of thought about it in this way, and it's that if I am very like I don't even know the best word for it. I think logical might be the easiest word I could use, but I would immediately default to the same person that okay, if I'm praying to God that God helps me overcome this thing, what I also recognize is that the same person who is responsible for these conditions and institutions and all that was praying to the same God when they created these institutions. So that didn't necessarily work for me. In fact, it was something that I personally was challenged by, and it did kind of create that almost like an anger about it. Is
Mhm.
that I can't, that's not my route. Like, I can't go that way because, again, you guys are using the same tool to empower you, and that's one of the things ever since this nation was founded. In
Mhm.
God we trust. Like, you enslaved,
Mhm.
but in God you trusted. So, God, something about same God that you praying to now to help you overcome it was the same God that told them that we should write this Constitution and make African American enslaved people 3/5 of a human being for the purposes of voting. Like, come on, these things did not work for me, so that was not my route. I understand that it works for other people, and I'm happy that they have something that works for them. For me, it just became important for me to mentally like equip myself to be able to deal with what was going on around me, like all of these systems, and that feeling of having to work harder than other people that I knew in order to achieve the same thing.
Mhm.
But I guess for me, I'm a competitive person, but not always. Like
Mhm.
I don't like competing against another person per
Mhm.
se, but I'm a competitive person within myself. If I say I'm going to do something,
Mhm.
I'm so competitive. Once those words come out of my mouth, I will challenge the heck out of myself to
Mhm.
do that thing and to not stop until that thing is done. So that is where my motivation, my inspiration, the energy that was required to overcome that,
Mhm.
the confidence that was built, sort of just protection
Mhm.
that I had because that type of situation, it mentally wears you down. And again, going back to like your childhood and how you are raised, when your parents are constantly presenting that to you as a child, you are worn down before you even have a chance to form any type of opinion on
Mhm.
how you're going to approach the thing.
Right.
So it's like you're beat down from the beginning and you can't like, so how do you ever gain momentum? I- Again, it's tough.
Mhm.
It is very tough when that is presented to you. But I have a really good friend who wasn't born in the United States, and she is, she is an African American woman, and she, because she was raised in the Caribbean where she wasn't, so like racism wasn't such a big thing in their community. There
Mhm.
was there there were people from different places. That was it. They did not have such a focus on racism. For her, when she got here and started interacting with more African American people who were raised in America, she was
Mhm.
like, "Man, y'all really talk about slavery and like the oppression of African Americans a lot." And it's almost to a point where it's the lens that you see everything through, even when it is not present. Like when someone is not thinking to do something negative towards you, you still have that in your mind, which is a weight that you bear anyway. Like whether someone's doing something or not, it's still a weight, that weight on your shoulders of
Mhm.
for example, if you're worried about walking into a room full of people who are not African American and you're worried about how they're going to judge you, that is a weight on your shoulder that you're walking in with. Whether they were thinking that before you walked into the room or not, it's
Mhm.
still a weight that you bear
Right.
before walking into that room. So when that is on you all of the time, it's hard to ever build any momentum.
Mhm.
But for those who are able to build momentum, I think about it the way people who wear weight vests when they're running,
Oh.
are. You've had all of this weight on you, all of this time from something that when you get to a human to human level with people, oftentimes you find that there's not a racist fuel in their mind that is constantly fueling racism. It's just another human being. And a lot of people, like this guy, John Hope Bryant, talks about this all the time, but it's not a negative intent that people have that really fuels a lot of the racist culture in America. It
Mhm.
is radical indifference. Like that's what he calls it, radical indifference. There are a lot of people who know that racism is a thing in America, but they are radically indifferent to it. So they are not going to stop it. They're not going to do anything to raise their awareness or act out of the norm for everyone else. But like I said, to the example, if I'm running with a weight vest on, and that weight is everything that I've been taught about what is stacked against me, almost to a point of thinking that, if we're just speaking directly in America, that white people have a problem, that
Right.
white people will always have a problem with me.
Mhm.
So if I'm walking around with that weight on my shoulders, every time I interact with a white person that does not demonstrate that, it removes a bit of that weight from me because I start to build up my own a library of my own interactions where I understand that not every single white person has a problem with me. So as you do it more and more and more and progress and you interact with more and more people, you that weight kind of gets removed. But you've been running with this weight for how long? So look at the strength and endurance that you have built up wearing that weight. So once you actually start to have some interactions where you realize that not that racism isn't a thing, but
Mhm.
that not every single person is looking at you through that lens and not every single person has that energy. You take that weight off and now you're able to move about with strength and endurance and all the stuff that you built up from carrying that for so long. So if you are able to shed it, it's almost like an enormous benefit to you that you carried it for so long because now you have this resiliency that other people don't have because they never had to carry that weight. I
Yeah.
would, I, I'm infuriated when, um, like I said, I don't know anybody else who said
Mhm.
it. So when I've heard white people say that African Americans benefited from slavery,
No. Yeah.
that's yeah, that's not what I'm talking about here. I would not call that a benefit if I could give it just like my own son. I wanted to give him an opportunity to live a life where he did not have to walk around with that weight vest on. So I would not wish that on my worst enemy. So I definitely am infuriated when I hear that we somehow benefited from that. But just like the American, sort of narrative says, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So if I did carry this around for all this time, when it's off of me, I am going to use that strength. I am going to use that endurance and I am going to use that resilience to my benefit. So I don't think it's appropriate for someone else to look at that and then say, oh, well, look, we did you a favor.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah. Please don't ever, don't ever say that you did me a favor. But I can tell you that that is one thing that I take away from my experience as an African American person, is that, yeah, I did carry that for a while. And because I carried that, it does help me now with my resiliency. And I think that's one of the reasons why when I looked around in corporate America, like I did see a lot of people, African American people who demonstrated that resilience. And if that resiliency was paired with knowledge of
Mhm.
how to grow your career, I watched those same people grow up in companies.
Okay.
When it's not paired with knowledge on how to grow your career, I saw people who just continually took beating. They
Mhm.
stayed in the same place. They were always working the hardest. They were always, giving extra and trying, but they just didn't have the knowledge on how to climb up to that next rung. They just got worked.
Yeah.
They got worked and worked and worked and worked and got upset and left. And went somewhere and worked and worked and worked, got upset and left. So you're not able to build a career. You're not
Right.
able to excel, when that is the case. So
Mhm.
sorry. But yeah, you're not able to excel when that's the case. You're just working real hard and that effort is not optimized to grow your career and for you to be able to benefit from that. So yeah, the resiliency thing is there, but it's just how you use it. So there's still, like I said, that barrier of understanding how to take those odds that are stacked against you, um, and bet on yourself. Is a common phrase that is used because if the chips are stacked against you and the odds are against you, that means if you bet on yourself and win, you're going to win big because
Yeah.
no one else expected you to win. So, yeah, some people are able to bet on themselves. Some people they just seek coping mechanisms that help them kind of survive. So that's, like I said, those did not work for me.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I figured that out eventually, and I said, okay, I got to bet on myself. So even in my corporate career, same thing. Just saying, listen, you are capable. You can do this. You know, build relationships, understand what's going on, learn the game, play the game, get to where you need to get to, and then eventually I said, okay, well, I've done this, and
Mhm.
I've done all right at it. But what I really want to do is I want to be able to establish something for myself that I can build, that I can give to my family, that I can constantly be of service and help to other people. So and have fun, like
Yeah.
and enjoy life, not have that weight on me that I had for so long. So that's how I got to the place that I am now with the entrepreneurship, doing my podcast and all these types of things because I do know that I have something that is valuable. That again is building that spirit in the African American community, and it is being done. It is definitely being done. It's done in small pockets, I think, and even large organizations are able to achieve it. But I
Mhm.
think, yeah, you have to. There has to be some level of support and knowledge to be able to help people move past that. Looking at the mountain, saying that the mountain is against me, and how do I figure out what my first step is, even to progress? So I hope that.
It's kind of you need more self-love and self-confidence.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it's a luxury. Like,
Yeah,
honestly, it's funny to say that, but it is. It is a luxury even to have time to like give yourself love,
yeah,
because most people wake up and depending on what your financial situation is, most because that's usually the number one factor that's going to determine how you behave for a lot of people, right? Like, if you're not in the right space, you don't wake up and think, nice to be alive. It's a good day. I got this. You don't do any of that. You wake up and you think, I got to be at work at this time. Got to do
mhm,
this thing. This bill needs to be paid. All of these other things. So you may not even get an opportunity to care for yourself and love yourself the way that you need to build your confidence and be able to go and take the actions that you want to. So it
yeah,
is. It's it's a tough position to be in, and I don't look down on people who are not able to get themselves out of that cycle. Though as much as I would, if I could, sort of shake people and wake them up,
yeah,
say like, hey, if I could give you one thing, like, believe in yourself, like, just no matter what is going on, believe that you are capable of doing it. See something outside of this, and just dream it and start to work towards it. But it is like you can't reach every single person, and tell them that. But that's what has to happen in order for people to be able to shake that staring at the mountain and saying that I've got to climb over this mountain before I can get anywhere. But
yeah.
other people get to walk straight through a level ground tunnel that takes them straight to the other side. Why do I have to climb the mountain instead of walking through the tunnel like everybody else? But you can ask yourself that question, but I don't know if you're going to like the answer. And by the time you sit and do all that, you could have probably taken 10 steps to start your journey over the mountain, get to the other side. Then once you're on the other side, maybe you build a tunnel for your people to be able to walk through a tunnel instead of climbing over the mountain.
Exactly. And even if I don't know, maybe you can find that answer and then use the anger that it creates to propel you forward.
Yeah,
What I've found um, is that anger propels you forward. It propels you up. The more
yeah.
angry you get, if you use it correctly, it can just propel you. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? If you can give our listeners some encouragement of some kind, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I learned actually going through an anger management class that anger is a natural emotion. Your response to your anger is more important than the fact that you are angry. And I think again, that is one of those things that can fuel people to this, but you have to be in control of your anger. And what I find, and I talked about this a little bit in that weight that is worn, is that sometimes that anger is directed at another group of people. And it's not like that. That's only going to breed the same situation. It's only going to breed the same tension. It's only going to breed the same strife. If you apply that anger to the circumstance and use that anger to be able to overcome that circumstance, find a way around that circumstance, engineer a solution to that problem, then that's the right place to put that anger. And that is, again, if I'm looking collectively at African Americans and the experience here, we have like an infinite source of fuel. We got like a nuclear reactor worth of fuel that can propel us to this. It's just a matter of us being able to take that energy and use it towards something that's going to be beneficial. I don't, and I will say this boldly and take any response to it. There is no good use in applying that anger or hatred or whatever to another person. Nothing good is ever going to come out of that. The best thing you could do with that energy is reverse the role. And,
Mm.
and do we really want to do that? If we applied all of the anger that from what we experienced to another group of people, excuse me, that we feel are responsible for our circumstance, then the best thing you could do is flip the role. And if we flip that role, all it's going to result in is them feeling the same way about us that we feel about them. And eventually they're going to flip that role. So it just becomes a vicious cycle at that point when you target that another group of people with that anger or and let it build into hatred. So what I would say to the listener, on this topic is every time you feel that frustration, you have to find a positive outlet for it. You have to let that drive you to keep moving in a direction of what it is that you want, not against what you don't want.
Right.
Because even when you spend all that time and energy applying it towards what you don't want, you're giving a lot of energy to what you don't want. Like you must know what you want first and then leverage that energy to drive you towards what it is that you want. So if you're sitting in a negative position and you see like all of these structures and things like this, and you hear the history of how, your people got to this place and how that cycle has been perpetuated for such a long time. When you feel that anger, think about what it is that you want to do and let that make you get up and do that thing. If it's my people been struggling for too long and, I want to start a business, I want to support my family, and that's the way that I want to do it. I want to employ, people in my community. Let that anger take you there instead of letting it take you to places where the best thing you can do is just flip that role, and that's not going to help anybody. I do not want to be the person that is perched atop when I've had to do negative things to the people who are below, right, in order to get there, because
Yeah.
they are all looking at me, waiting, praying, hoping for my downfall. And in the
Mhm.
worst case scenario, they are plotting, planning to cause my downfall. So yeah, that anger is a great motivator.
Mhm.
I would say that anger is a great motivator, and I still have it. I being 100% candid. I had an executive who asked me around the time that George Floyd was murdered, and everybody had this big energy towards the DEI stuff and wanting to get educated and all this stuff. And I was asked if I was willing to engage in some candid conversation. And it was a white woman who was asking me about this because she had started reading some books and she was like, "Whoa, I gotta like this is crazy. I never knew." Like, yes, I know, I understand. Never knew. You wouldn't know. You weren't born in the shoes. So you have to seek it out if you were ever gonna know. So we had like months of dialogue about this. And I told her, one of the things that it always surprises me about, white people in America in general,
Mhm.
um, it surprises me that if you knew what uh, the enslaved people in this country went through, and it's available, you can hear in great detail what was done. All of the descendants of those people, it amazes me. One, that every white person in America does not wake up, thank God that we are not angry as we should be.
Right.
Because The other thing I'm surprised about is that the descendants of those people did not go on an all-out war path for revenge.
Right.
Like, they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't, and they still to this day do not.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I if I had to give an answer, I know why, because I don't know that I've ever seen as loving and as forgiving of a people
Right.
as my people.
Yeah.
So and that I love that about us. And just like any other loving and forgiving person, sometimes it lends itself to being taken advantage of. And it is what it is. You
Mhm.
have to be smart just as much as you have to be loving. So you have to use your head and your heart at the same time. But I told her that. I said it surprises me that you know the descendants of the enslaved people did not just go on an all out war path for revenge.
Right.
And that goes back to the whole thing of I think we've been doing that. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of examples of us not using that anger and letting it boil over to hate. We have just been using it and moving ourselves forward. And I think a lot of people, may get to a point where they stall out with it and
Mm.
they sit in a place where there's just a balance of anger towards a group of people who they
Mhm.
feel like are responsible for the circumstance, and then anger towards like getting through each day, which then kind of has you stalled, where you get a job and you work your job and you're angry at white people consistently.
Mhm.
And you're also angry enough to keep working super hard every day and sort of maintain this balance. Well, imagine if you stop wasting that energy being angry at, white people and put that towards your energy to do what it is that you want to do, or have a vision, bigger vision for yourself. You will have more than enough energy to move towards what it is that you want. So I encourage people, just anytime you are feeling that way, when you are feeling like, you know, it's these people and these circumstances and blah blah blah, like all of those types of things, just say, okay, what can I do with this energy?
Yeah.
Like, I know I feel it, and there's nothing wrong with you feeling it. But as soon as you recognize that you're feeling it, you have to ask yourself, what's the most productive thing that I could do with this energy? Because to look at another group of people and constantly spend like just so much of yourself
Yeah.
with like a disdain or a hatred or whatever towards another group of people, it's only hurting you. Like, that's in your body. Your cells and your organs are reacting to you holding that feeling when you could be letting it out into the world in a positive way,
Right.
writing. You
Yes.
could be speaking.
Mhm.
Again, you could be building things for your community. You could be doing all of those things, and that releases it,
Yeah.
because then you're not looking at them as somebody who can hold you back. You're looking at yourself as someone who has facilitated the progress of yourself and your community. So use it. It is a great fuel, but just, separate it from the people. Like, redirect that stuff. Is nothing good that comes from directing that anger towards another group of people. It's not going to yield the result that you want. I don't There's no way to slice it where it does. So it's not going to yield the result that you want. So use that energy for something positive. Been doing it, continue.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for that encouragement. And Sheldon, I hate so much, but we've run out of time, and I
Yeah.
just thank you so much for coming by. And any time that you want to come back and share a conversation with us, speak to us a little more, you're more than welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melody. I appreciate it. Good luck continuing on with your podcast. And thank you for creating this space and being willing and vulnerable enough to explore a conversation, like this, because it's very meaningful. And I hope that your audience benefits from this.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
remember, you this is Revive and Rise, and you don't have to suffer alone. So I have a website, an email, and I'd be more than happy to listen. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.